Welcome to the Your Day Was a Front Page podcast. In this episode, we talk with Melanie Gilbert, the Registrar for the Kahnawake Residency Law. This month, the Office of the Kahnawake Kanienkehaka Registry is getting set to officially launch the Residency Permit portion of the law, and we discuss what this means. We're joined by Melanie Gilbert of the...
It's the OKKR. It's the Office of the Kanienkehaka of Kahnawake Law. That's what we're called. It's not like the membership office anymore. So we call it the OKKR.
And we're here talking about the launch of a new portion of the Kahnawake Residency Law.
Yes. Well, some people may know that the residency law was enacted in 2019. And since then, we've been working on all of the administrative portions and whatnot to get to the point where we are today. So it's basically divided into two sections. So the first section is the permit process, and the second section is when it comes to evictions and things like that. That part is going to be on hold for a while. We're looking at launching that probably in the fall. And at that time, people will be able to make a complaint against a person that they believe should not be living in the community. And then it would go through the investigation process and whatnot. But we're not ready to start that just yet.
So the permit portion is starting
in June. Yeah. We actually don't have a date yet in June, but it will be starting. And there are 4 different categories where people could get a permit. So after a lot of discussion and a lot of debate through the CDMP process, which is the community decision-making process that launched the law, people in the community had seen these 4 different types as covering probably the majority of the people who are living in the community or who want to live in the community. So the first one is the approved Kahnawake resident. Now, in former membership laws, because it used to be tied with the membership law before, now it's not. So those people were called non-member residents. So those were people who were living here prior to 1981. If they were non-native and they were married to a native person here and they were able to live out their life here as long as they weren't divorced. You know, if they were widowers, different things like that. So that's what the approved Kahnawake resident is. And now this part of the application is available to people who do not meet the criteria for the KKR. So to meet the criteria for the KKR, you have to have 4 great-grandparents that are recognized under the custom code. It has nothing to do with Indian affairs. It has nothing to do with having a band number. It's a criteria that is spawned from the custom code that was put together by the elders in, I would say, like the late 90s, something like that. So people who have a minimum of 2 great-grandparents with different categories. So if you're already living in the community, you're with someone who is on the KKR, maybe you have family ties here, you have ties to the community, but it's not like you don't meet the criteria for the KKR, so you have to leave. That's not the case. So this gives people an opportunity to be able to live here.
Okay, and you touched on the Kahnawake Kanienkehaka law.
Yes.
And that membership and residency used to be tied together through that law.
Yes.
When did that change and why did that change?
Well, that changed in 2018 when the KKL was actually passed. That was after 5 years of the CDMP process, of people meeting twice monthly for all of that time, talking about, what they wanted to see in a law. And we thought, and the people thought, that residency should be separate, that maybe you are not entitled to all of the benefits under a KKR, but you could still live here. So that was the thing. It was to give people more of an opportunity, I think.
Okay, great. And then so now with the Kahnawake residency law moving forward, what are the different categories that people can apply to?
Okay, so the first one, like I mentioned, is the approved Kahnawake resident. So that would cover people who have a minimum of 2 great-grandparents that are recognized. And when I say that are recognized, it means when they make the application, I'm going to do the review and overview and the decision saying whether those great-grandparents are recognized or not. It's not whether you recognize them, it's whether I recognize them. So that's where it comes down to. So you can have 2. You can have 3, and in those 2 categories, whether it's 2 or it's 3, you have to have ties to the community. You have to have ties to your family. You have to be a participant in the community. You have to know what's going on in the community. And there's a certain set of themes that I do cover when I interview people for that. So there's that type of thing. And then there's a different category when a person has ancestry. They have Ungwehue ancestry and were adopted as a minor prior to 2003. So they would have to show me the ancestry and whatnot, and they're automatically put on. And then there's also the people that I mentioned before that are non-native that were married prior to 1981, and they're allowed to stay here under this section. So they don't have to apply. So if they were already on the list for non-member residents, they're automatically grandfathered into this list. And that's pretty much all the criteria for approved Kahnawake resident. So the next one, so we have a residency permit, just residency. So that would mean that a person has to have some Ungwehue ancestry that has to be proven. But they have to be living either married or living in common law with a person who is on the KKR. So at that point, they would be eligible for that permit. Then there's a work education permit. So that's for people who also have ancestry, but are not from the community and either are working or going to school either here on the territory or locally. So they can apply. And then the last one is a humanitarian permit. So that's the permit when a person who's living on the territory needs assistance. When a person on the territory needs someone to help them, if they are terminally ill or if they're disabled, different things like that. So that permit is only good for 1 year and it's only a one-time thing. You can't keep renewing that, where the other ones you can keep renewing them.
Okay. Do we have an idea about how many people could be eligible for each of these categories?
Not offhand, no. But I think the purpose around it, like the discussion during the CDMP process, was that people wanted to know who was living here and why they were here if you were not on the KKR. So now it gives people an opportunity to apply and say, well, this is why I'm here, because I'm living with so-and-so that's on the KKR, because I'm working here, because I'm going to school. And I think this is a long time coming, really.
And I mean, I think it kind of plays into, some of the discussions that we've been seeing lately about housing and, the lack of being able to find affordable housing or apartments or
right.
or whatever. And because there's people who are not from the community who are living here for one reason or another, but as a community, maybe we don't know who they are or why they're here, right?
Yes. Well, in recent years, if you were an Ungwehue person with someone who was on the KKR, you haven't been eligible for any services. So now that's different. Last fall, we went to Chief and Council and we had a discussion with them. And we said, so if someone were to apply for a permit and they have ancestry, you have to have ancestry, and they're with someone that's on the KKR, we are proposing that those people would be eligible for services. And council agreed.
What kind of services are we talking about?
Well, they could have access to housing. They could have access to land. They could have access to, I think those are really the top two. There's a few other things. But of course, if they were to gain, a land allotment or a housing loan, it stays in the name of the person that's on the KKR. But it just gives them an opportunity to apply for it.
Okay.
So, which is good, which didn't exist in the past. Okay. So I think that's a real, a new feature that opens up the doors for a lot of people.
Okay. And say somebody, when the process opens sometime in the month of June, mm-hmm. Somebody comes in and has all the paperwork and fills out the application, puts everything in. How long are we looking at a process of going from application to approval?
Well, one of the new features that we have is that every name is going to be posted publicly. So each person that makes an application that has been accepted and is complete is going to have their name posted for 30 days. So there's that first hurdle, I guess, you have to get through. And during that 30 days, people are going to have an opportunity to make comments, to make an objection, different things like that. So depending on the volume, because I am expecting that there would be quite a lot of people that would apply, meaning upwards of 50 people at one time, I would say because I have certain deadlines that I have to meet, people wouldn't wait much longer than 2 months, depending on whether we get objections or we get any comments or anything like that. Because part of the application process is getting a criminal background check. So that's something that people had wanted to see because we wanted to make sure that you're not just coming here to hide out from something else, from something else that you might have done. So it gives people, I guess, a level of comfort that there is a background check done. So once all of these things are done, I would say after the 30 days, not more than 30 days after that.
You're talking about too posting names of people who are applying.
Yes.
And I mean, what if people have comments or questions, what would constitute somebody being rejected from that? I mean, there might be some people making claims that are unfounded or frivolous or whatever. So, how will that process work?
Well, there is an investigation process that I would be taking part in for sure. And so, if it's a matter of, false claims or something like that, I would have to follow up on that. And I make the decision as to whether or not, these claims are valid or not. When people have an opportunity to make an objection, it's not just calling me on the phone and saying, hey, Melanie, blah, blah, blah. It's not like that. There's an application process that they have to fill in as well. So they have to put their pen to paper.
Okay.
And they have to stand behind what they're saying. So I think that's a different feature. So if a person feels really strongly, then they will do it. And then if they don't feel strongly, well, then it's up to them what they choose to do after that. And then if they have a list of complaints against a group of people, there's a cost for each one of the complaints that they make.
Okay.
So, you just can't throw a list of 100 people on my desk and say, these are the ones that I don't care for. And so it's a more thought out process. I think it's a more accountable process, really.
Talking about the residency law and being, I guess, slowly implemented in various parts, right?
Yeah.
How long before it's going to be fully implemented? And what are some of the features that of the law that people might not be familiar with?
Well, for a full implementation, I would say by the fall. So by Labor Day or so or whatnot, we can start talking about evictions and things like that. It's just on our end, there's a couple of different processes that we still have to put into place prior to that. And then there's a new council coming in, so we have to orient them to what's happening and whatnot. I don't think we ever had an actual process for evictions before. Most of the eviction process or the complaint process wasn't as formal. I think it was more so a grassroots process, which is great. Most things come out of the will of the people, and this is one of the things that has come out of the will of the people. But it didn't have as much of an enforcement angle than it does now, because it will be enforceable, and people will be asked to leave, people will be evicted, and people will have to go.
If somebody's given an eviction notice and they refuse to leave, what happens?
Then the peacekeepers get involved and they will be escorted off the territory.
Okay.
There's a time frame. There's all time frames. It's not like you just get it and then you have to. There's all time frames that are in the law, and we're going to be announcing a compliance officer that we've hired. So that'll be coming in the next couple of weeks. Okay.
Is there anything else you want to add?
The application process is a little bit long. It's there's a lot of information that we're asking for, and there's a payment for the application. There's a payment for the criminal background check. So we're asking people that once they do have an application to make sure that everything is complete, or else it will be rejected. So they have to make sure it's complete. And then we do our best at the office when it comes in to say, well, you've made all the different points that you need to make, and it's a complete application. But it's up to the individual to make sure that they are applying for the permit that they think that they want, first of all, and then to come in with a complete application. So I think that's probably the most extensive application that MCK has besides housing, really. So I hope that people take the time to look on KahnawakeMakingDecisions.com /residency, and there's a whole listing of the regulations. There's the laws on there, the CDMP process is on there, and all the comments that people had during that time, so they can make an informed choice if they choose to apply. And another thing I would like to add is that the residency law had come in under the urgent lawmaking process. So that means it has to function for a certain amount of time. And then you go back through the CDMP process and go through it section by section and see what worked and see what didn't and whatnot. So we're hoping with some of the COVID restrictions lifting that we'll probably be able to go through the CDMP process this fall.
Through the CDMP process, this would be a type 1 law, correct?
Yes, it would go into a type 1 law because it affects the whole community.
Okay, yes. and that's a little bit more, I guess, extensive than the other portions of the law. So how long are we expecting to see this go through this process to take?
Well, I mean, it's kind of hard to say, right? It depends on the type of concerns and questions that people do have that actually attend the meetings. And then we're only going to have a couple of months to actually see it function. You know what I mean? So it's not ideal.
Yeah.
But I hope that it wouldn't last much longer than next spring.
Okay, because we have seen certain laws and certain things go through the CDMP process and take years.
Mm-hmm.
You know, membership law being one of them.
Yes.
So it could be a long process that we're going into.
It could be. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball in front of me, but I mean, you never know. And then just going back to the KKL, people who've been denied on the KKL can also apply to the residency law because they might not have met the criteria of the 4 great-grandparents, but they might have 2. They might have 3. And then they might have their ties to their family and ties to the community and things like that. So it gives people, I don't know, I guess you could say a second chance, you know.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, now go everybody for listening. And Yurdiwas, I would like to thank the Community Media Strategic Support Fund for supporting this initiative.